So thank you today to everyone who's joining us for this live session. We're excited to bring Mark Fleming of First American Title and Steve Murray of Real Trends uh, to the Alliance to give a 2021 forecast and what the economy and the housing market is going to look like. We're lucky enough to have Kasandra Alicea with us out of the beautiful city of San Antonio, Texas, as our hostess this afternoon. She's going to be facilitating the dialogue with both the gentlemen and then the Q&A portions of the presentation as well. If you do have questions that you would like to ask, if you're with us on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature. If you're with us on Facebook, I will be silently observing those comments and relaying them to Kasandra in the background. So with that, welcome Kasandra, and I will throw the ball over to you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Mark and Stephen, for joining us today. I really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy days to kind of inform us on what is expected to go on in 2021. With us today, we have Mark Fleming, the Chief Economist for First American Title. And in that role, he leads an economics team responsible for analysis, commentary, forecasting trends in the real estate and mortgage market. I know you've been in the business overall for about 20 years plus. Is that correct, Mark?
That's right. Can't you tell? Going gray. You know?
It could be a stressful but fun industry. And
Exactly.
Also with us today, we have Steve Murray, the president and co-founder of Real Trends, the nation's leading trends and research organization. Excuse me. And to my understanding, Steve, you've been in the residential real estate industry for about 37 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually 44 now.
Oh, well, then I read the wrong bio.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
thank you for all that service. It's amazing. So I guess we'll start today with Mark. Mark, if we can kind of get your input on what you expect from the economy in 2021. I know there's been a lot of great changes recently, and I know that's going to hopefully help for the better for the real estate market. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. We're good?
I can see
Looks
it.
good.
Okay, perfect. So many platforms, you never quite know from one to the other these days. So appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, this is, it's been quite a year, right? That's not, that's broadly stated, not even just in terms of the real estate economy. And even for the real estate economy, it's been quite a year. And I'll kind of walk through my take on what's happened in residential real estate, and then also along the way sort of project what we think might happen next year. The short answer though is if there's one segment of the economy that's been immune to the virus, I think it's this one. So we start with some of the reasons why. Well, it's not surprising when you look back historically that renters are always more at risk of becoming unemployed. So the blue bars are the renter unemployment rates over time. Owned household unemployment rates are in green. They're always higher. It's a little harder to tell, but that orange line shows that when in recession, that gap actually grows. So there's a disproportionate impact on the distress or the stress of an economic recession falls generally on renters. Now, that's not miraculously because somehow, if you're a renter, you're more likely to get laid off. It's because of the things that drive you to be a homeowner are also the same things that tend to protect you from being laid off. So homeowners are much more likely to be older, more educated, higher incomes than renters. And that's really where the protection lies. Now, this time around, the economic recession is even more severely impacting less educated, lower income, think of hospitality, service sector types of jobs. So it's really having a much more dire impact on renters than it is on homeowners. So one reason why we've actually fared relatively well is the unfortunate truth is that there's a disproportionate impact of the recession, not on the home-owning 2/3 of us in the United States, but much more so on the other 1/3 who are renters today. That said, of course, it's not that there's not going to be any impact. Clearly, there are homeowners. There's a few million actually in forbearance programs who are feeling the distress of the economy because it's a pretty stressful economy, certainly in the labor market at the moment. Okay, One other good reason why it's different, and something that has been basically a wind at our backs for a number of years now and will continue to be so, is simply demographics. This chart shows you the household formation rate, so new households being formed for either renters in green or homeowners in blue. And you can actually see that all the way back to 2004, we really started to get many, many more rental households being formed than owning households. And that kept pace all the way through the recession, the last recession, the global financial crisis one, and up until about 2016 or 2017. In fact, the home ownership rate is the total number of owned households over the total number of households rented plus owned. And so the fact that that green line, the growth rate in rental households, was consistently about 3 or 4% year after year after year, really meant for the last 15 years, we've been adding lots of rental households to the denominator of the home ownership rate. And even with the foreclosures, we really didn't remove many homeowners. So the decline in the home ownership rate in the global financial crisis wasn't a story about fewer homeowners. It was actually a story about more rental households, and collectively more households in the United States, hence a lower share who are homeowners. And remember, we all talked about the conversations about millennials will never going to want to become homeowners. Well, around 2017 or 2018, that changed. And you can now see that blue line. There's lots of growth on the owning side of household formation relative to renting. In fact, we're effectively cannibalizing, to use a relatively strong term, cannibalizing the rental side, where a rental household says, nope, I'm going to become a first-time home buyer. They form an owned household at the expense of the rental side. That's what's really driving the home ownership rate up right now. These last two data points are pretty extreme. That's collection problems during the pandemic on the part of census, but the trend is clearly still there. And that's a very, very strong demographic tailwind that's probably going to go on for at least another 5 years. Lots of millennial demand to become homeowners. Here you can see it another way. When you break it down by age, the 35 to 44 and under 35, which is your core millennial cohort, most of the homeownership growth today is coming from those two cohorts. Well, where are all these homeowners going? This map shows you migration patterns. If you're blue, your net migration is out. If you're green, it's migration in. The size of the bubbles are the sizes of the market. That's why New York is the largest there. The darker blue you are, the more out migration is, and the darker green you are, the more in migration there is. So you can see there's a general pattern, interestingly, somewhat to the Midwest, but also certainly to the Southeast and all the way across the Sun Belt. Lots and lots of in migration into many of those markets. The Sun Belt and Southeast also actually correlates heavily with where we're building a lot of homes, where it's easier to build homes, where it's cheaper to build homes. So home building and people moving in and employment going there is really the growth engine right now in terms of where people are going, is the Southeast and across the Southwest, all the way, Kasandra, through your neck of the woods in Texas, all the way out into Arizona. What's not so good is where I live in the Mid-Atlantic. Everybody seems to want to leave the cold, dreary weather and the bad commutes and the high-priced neighborhoods, and you know, Southern California as well. So those migration patterns have been going on for a number of years. That's not new to the pandemic. We do believe, though, that there will be some exacerbation, if you will, or maybe that's not the right word, some increased ability of that migration because of the pandemic, largely because we now realize the ability to work from home. That's not to say that we're going to work from home at the same extent that we are now. We're not working from home at the same extent now as we were in March and April. So it's already come down. But I don't see that it's likely that we'll go back to the way we were before. I think many of us, even if we have a preference for it, if not are able to do it, there's much more willingness, or there will be much more willingness to work somewhere other than where your workplace is, so to speak. So that we had to ask the question because it was very popular in the news in the last few months, was this idea, this sort of flight to the suburbs driven by the pandemic. So we looked at data across all the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the country and said, can we find a significant trend of migration patterns out of the urban into the suburban parts of a metropolitan area? And in those 5 metros, we did that by basically looking at prices, because price is the relative balance of supply and demand. If everyone's fleeing the urban and going to the suburban, you expect much more price pressure upward in the suburban and pressure down in the urban area. We only found it, or only found statistical evidence, if you will, of it in New York City. Well, if you think about it, why is it New York unique in this sense? Well, New York is the single densest population-wise city in the United States. In time of pandemic, population density is not good. It's also heavily reliant on public transportation. Not any kind of public transportation, but tubes in the dark underground, packed with lots of people. In time of pandemic, that ain't so good. And it's also very expensive. So yes, we find that in New York, and you could sort of by association say, okay, markets like Boston, maybe here in Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, similarly urbanly dense, public transportation infrastructure and things like that. But many other parts, in fact, most other parts of the country, the urban areas actually look, by any relative measure to those dense ones, suburban already. Atlanta's pretty suburban. Houston's pretty suburban. The Southern California metros are pretty suburban. Not a lot of heavy reliance on public transportation. So this acceleration by the pandemic, I think, will be unique to these more dense, older American cities, not most cities in the US. And on top of that, we have to recognize all those millennials, there was already a demographic trend toward the suburbs in terms of where they wanted to buy their homes. And that was that's an underpinning that's already there. We do not believe that house prices are overvalued. You might think that's a crazy statement, Mark, but when we take a look at prices, it's not just the nominal price of a home, it's how much does it cost to pay the mortgage? So what's your monthly burden of buying that home? And of course, with low rates, your income goes an awful long way. So that blue line is basically your purchasing power, interest rate and income, adjusted price affordability. So right now, the average American rental household, given rates today, can afford to buy a $500,000 home with a 5% down payment and a 33% debt to income ratio. Completely reasonable loan terms with that down payment. The average priced home in the US is not quite $300,000. So there's a huge wedge of affordability relative to price, even though the nominal price is high, driven by very, very low interest rates. And those are likely to continue into next year, if not further, that is driving high purchasing power and demand for all of those millennials. But real estate is local, and it's not the same necessarily everywhere. So when we looked at the largest metropolitan areas, there are three by this measure where effectively the metro level blue line is below the green line, using that chart as your reference. And those are the three major metropolitan areas, Silicon Valley in San Francisco and LA in Southern California. Everywhere else, the level of purchasing power for people's average incomes in those markets is, combined with national interest rates, is higher than the nominal prices. Even Washington, D.C., where I live, which is a high-priced market, clearly we're paying people too much because it's a very affordable market in Washington at the moment. Okay. Some other reasons why this time it's different. There was a lot of debt leverage. We all know the 228 and 327 mortgages that were common in the global financial crisis. Let's call that financial innovation. Really levered up people's debt relative to their incomes, allowed them to stay in the market and demand more home and buy more home. At the time, it was true. This is the orange line here as a percentage of personal income. But those types of loans are gone. Interest rates are down. So even though people may have large loan balances, their ability to service them relative to their income is very, very low, below 4% right now. So there's not a lot of debt burden if you were to get into trouble with your ability to pay your mortgage. The share of your household balance sheet that goes to paying it is much smaller today than it was before. So that's one safety measure. We'll go here. Another one is equity. Collectively, homeowners in the United States today own about 20 trillion with a T dollars worth of home equity. This is the orange line. You can see that's up by about $5 trillion since the global financial crisis. The blue bars are what we refer to as our national LTV. Effectively, what we're doing is measuring the total amount of debt outstanding relative to the total value of the housing stock to kind of come up with this national LTV. And you can see it was much higher in the global financial crisis. And of course, when house prices came down relative to debt, the LTV went up. But right now, it's much lower. It's below 40%. On average, most homeowners have a very significant share of equity in their homes. And the reason we care about this is this equity buffer is a very important safety net when it comes to the housing market and the risk of foreclosure. To be foreclosed upon, two things have to happen. One is an inability to pay. And as I just showed you, there's more ability to pay now than before. So that risk is lower. But even if you can't make your mortgage payment, but you have equity in your home, you don't go into foreclosure. Instead, you sell your home, or what we like to refer to, because economists are great at coming up with very kind and sharing terms, involuntary sale. And those involuntary sales are better than a foreclosure because we don't have all the distress, we don't have the blight, we don't have the feedback loop to drive prices down. Nonetheless, that individual obviously involuntarily had to sell their homes. The risk of the foreclosure is mitigated by the equity that most people are likely to have, and instead they can do the sale instead. The good news about all of those sales is if there were a market in which you bring your house to market and someone will buy it, this is the one. Not just an involuntary sale, any sale. In fact, the largest challenge to the housing market that's been actually getting worse over the last couple of years and really accelerated during the pandemic, that drop in the orange line at the very end there, is that you can't buy what's not for sale. Lots of millennials want to buy homes. They've got the purchasing power. The rates are low. All the homeowners out there don't want to sell their homes. So the blue and the green lines is the count of homes for sale. But when you look over such a large range of time, the housing stock has grown bigger. So to sell 4 million homes now versus 4 million homes 20 or 25 years ago is not the same thing. So to account for that inflation in the size of the market, the orange line measured on the right-hand side is the percentage share of the housing stock. And you can see it's about 1.3% right now. That's significantly lower than it's ever been since we started tracking, went back and found data all the way back to 1991. So the market on the supply side is extremely tight right now, largely because many existing homeowners don't want to bring their homes to market. And it's not just, I'm afraid because, I don't want people traipsing through and giving me coronavirus. It's much less that, actually, as it is, if you think about it, housing is a perfectly heterogeneous good, and on top, meaning every home is different. And on top of that, a home seller turns around and becomes a home buyer. And it's because it's a heterogeneous good. I'm not trying to buy any, it's not like any iPhone will do. It has to be a better home than the one I'm in now. But when the inventory gets really tight, I choose not to sell my home for fear of not being able to find another home that I like to buy. So this sort of liquidity problem is beginning to plague the market, that people aren't selling because they're afraid of becoming a buyer and having to deal with the buyer side of the market. And then the first-time home buyers are just clamoring, please put anything up for sale for me to buy. They're not on the sales side, they're only on the buy side. So this is a dynamic that's at play. And while one solution for that is build more homes, because a new home, the seller isn't an existing homeowner, they're more than willing to sell the home, add to the housing stock. While we're getting better at it, we're still a long way to go. The green line is the average, 2-year average of household formation. So that's how much demand for shelter is growing. And the blue line is how many new homes we're adding to the stock. So anytime the blue is below the green, we're basically running behind the demand for shelter. You add up all those months that blue line is below the green, and it stands to the tune of a few million homes short of where we should be. The good news for home builders there is that if you build it, they will come because of this extreme shortage. And so we'll just end really quickly on showing basically how the housing market has performed through recession. So the solid lines are sales, the dotted lines are home prices, all of them indexed to the beginning of a recession. So you can see how home sales this time around did contract for the first couple of months precipitously, but the rebound has been extremely strong in sales. And prices in this recession, the red line, have continued to accelerate it because of these supply and demand dynamics that are in play today. And in fact, we're 2-3 weeks out from the end of the year. If you look at mortgage purchase applications, this will be the best year in a decade for mortgage purchase applications, better than any other in the past decade. Refinances this year will be only 1 year worse than 2012, so the second best year in a decade. And collectively, basically, between refinance and purchase applications, it's indicating one of the strongest mortgage markets in a year, even with the pandemic. And if you think about what I was just talking about for next year, will the supply shortage change? No. Will interest rates go up? No, the Fed is almost making sure that's going to happen. Will millennial demand dwindle? No. So all of the major fundamentals of the housing market that we have experienced in 2019 through the pandemic in 2020 are likely to persist in 2021, which I think sets us up for a very strong market again next year. Maybe much more so on the purchase side. The big risk is when rates do go up just a little bit, certainly the refinance market will get smaller. But home purchases, very, very strong, driven by millennial first-time home buyer demand. I'll stop there and send it back to you, Kasandra.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate that. That was a lot of interesting information. And I think it relieved the minds of many people, because I think a lot of people were worried that the rebound was going to be so great that it was just going to change the game completely. So that was amazing. Thank you. And you answered one of the questions I had. My main question for you pretty much answered at the end was, with the new administration coming into play and the elected appointees of everyone coming into the Fed. And I was going to ask about the interest rates and the projected interest rate for next year, but you answered that. So that's a good thing.
It's a good thing. In fact, they're sort of projecting that I wouldn't be surprised if we're still very, very close to 3, if not even below 3 for most of next year. They're going to put they'll do whatever they can to keep the long end of that yield curve low and keep mortgage rates cheap for next year, which, bodes well for the demand side. But, with such tight supply, what happens? We're just going to get more house price appreciation.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely happening here in San Antonio, and I'm sure everywhere, of course. And your slides really explained in depth as to where people are moving, where people want to live, and how people are living. So, and that's a big testament to the year that we've just experienced. But with the good news that you just gave us, 2021 is kind of like a do-over year, if you will.
Do-over sans pandemic. Woohoo!
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mark, for your information and your time. And please stay with us, and we're going to move on. And just quickly, for everyone who joined at the beginning and while Mark was speaking, I just want to kind of reiterate about the Alliance. If mostly everyone here is a member, but if you aren't a member, please visit realestatealliance.org. The Real Estate Alliance, or the Alliance as we call it, is off to a fantastic start. We were formed earlier this year, but officially launched October 1st. And in those a little over 2 months, we are just under 500 members. So we have a lot of great things to come. And our founder and president, Ryan, who introduced me earlier, has done some amazing things. So I want to thank you, Ryan, for all the hard work you've done and brought to us. I know 2021 is going to be a great year for the Alliance, so thank you for that. I know he's on mute now. So again, if anyone out there that is not a member is interested in joining, please visit realestatealliance.org. There are some amazing opportunities for payments, and we also have a discount code for new members. It's the word founder. That's valid towards the end of the year, and you can get a little discount on your membership. So if you have any questions, I'll throw my email and contact info into the chat as we go along, and anyone can reach out to myself or Ryan about joining. Now to move on, Steve Murray. Thank you, Steve, again for joining us. I really appreciate you joining us as well. Steve Murray is the president and co-founder of Real Trends, as I mentioned earlier. And I just wanted to congratulate you, Steve, with the news that broke yesterday. I don't know if you'd like to let us in on that.
Well, sure. No, after 34 years, we founded Real Trends 34 years ago. We sold our publications, content, and conferences to a larger company called Housing Wire, HW Media. They came out of building a lot of what Real Trends did in the mortgage industry, and it was a great fit for us for them to add Real Trends for real estate industry coverage to their mortgage industry coverage. So all of our content, publications, and conferences are now part of the HW Media company. I retained the consulting side of our practice. Scott Wright and I are partners in that business. So I'm not retiring. I'm just shifting my focus to more pure consulting than trying to also run a media company.
Definitely.
So and they retained almost all of our employees are now working with HW Media, and it's off to a really good start. I couldn't be happier with the way things are turning out.
That's amazing. That's great news, and that'll only allow you to do greater things that you can focus on just the consulting side of it.
Yeah,
that's great. So, that being said, congratulations again.
Thank you much.
Why don't you fill us in on what your forecasted trends are for the housing market in 2021?
Everything Mark said.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you for that, Mark.
We can wrap this up.
Any questions?
It's no fun.
I really liked his data. I kind of anecdotally or instinctively understood many of those parts because I took a basic economics course 50 years ago in college and a law of supply and demand. The main question I'd ask for all the people participating here, why are you listening to what I have to say? You should be out trying to get some listings because we've got to find some inventory. Mark said it eloquently and factually. It is a real challenge, and that will be probably the biggest challenge in 2021 is inventory and pricing. It's good for his background. I hope everyone saw that. There is still room to go in the price to the cost of monthly cost of housing, that a lot of Americans still have the ability to afford housing in most markets. Here's the thing, and I like to throw caution, just a little caution before we all think of the big party about the 2021 and probably beyond party. We're forming households faster than we're building housing, and that's been going on for a decade. And as Mark points out, we're millions of units behind where we need to be for the people of our country. I liked the other day, I said to a group, and everybody's just like, "That's going to be a great year." I said, well, last January and February, we got off to a great start. And then this thing showed up in March. And it affected everything. Now, one of the things, what did we learn? We learned that for us in housing, it turns out that Americans place a lot more value in the homes they have, psychically and emotionally and practically, than we thought. Because we've just seen a huge migration of people from urban cores to some suburbs, and we've seen them buy second homes, and we've seen corporations, many of the leading companies, even in our own industry, Realogy, Remax, Compass, to name a few, Zillow, another one, they're basically freeing their people to go live where they want to live. And so people are going to lower cost areas, lower housing costs, lower tax areas, maybe more sunshine. I talked to a young woman the other day, a senior executive with one of those national companies, and she was just ecstatic. She was able to move with her husband and two small children about an hour and a half away and were able to afford twice as much house. And she now can afford a house that has a yard, and not only that, but she has room now for a home office. And I've talked to dozens of young executives with people in our industry who were able to move, and they did because the place they had wasn't set up for a home office and children, so to speak. So this is really, I haven't seen the data on it. I don't know whether it's millions or tens of millions of Americans who have moved permanently under the new ethic, which is I can work where I live. I don't have to live where my work was. That's a big, big change demographically. And I appreciated everything Mark presented. In the brokerage industry, we're, according to a dozen to 2 dozen state association of realtors, leaders, and leaders of large local association realtors, they're looking at an additional 2 to 4% growth in the realtor numbers next year. A lot of people out of the hospitality industry who have been laid off, hotels, airlines, restaurants, so on and so forth. We are one of the great, great industries where it does not cost a lot of time and money to get a license and become a real estate person. And you don't have to have a college degree or an advanced degree. You don't have to have years of experience. You don't have to have a big resume. You know what you have to do? You have to get a license. You have to become a realtor, join the MLS. It's a couple $1,000s in most jurisdictions. It may be 2 to 3 months of time. And then you know what you need? Grit. Grit. That's what you need. You have to develop a plan and work that plan. Our industry is one of the few left where there are no limitations. If you're prepared to apply yourself and really go out there and work at it, you can build a career with no limits. And I'm not like a spokesperson for the realtor organization. Don't get me wrong. This has been my home for 44 years, this industry. I just know many, many, many friends of mine who, even people who had great 40-year careers in other industries, retired, stayed home, 64 years old, came back, got their license, and now it's 3-4 years later, and they're making 6-figure incomes because they have good work ethic. And they have found this is a really great second career. And we've always been a home for that. But we're also increasingly a home for young families. And we're seeing more and more young people, all walks of life, looking at our industry. Now there's good and bad with that. With a constrained supply of inventory, that means there's more competition for scarce listings. What is an outcome of that? One of the things we tracked since 1991 at Real Trends, we have access to the data. We have access to inventory data and average commission rates and the number of realtors. When we compile that data, we know that the more scarce the inventory is, when you compare it to the number of realtors, the lower the commission rate goes, because realtors will compete for scarce inventory. And one of the ways they do that is by what they charge a seller to sell a home. So expect increased competition for scarce listings. One of the consequences is likely to be a decline in the commission rate. We've been tracking it, especially since about 2012. It has declined nationally, for instance, from about 5.4% to closing in on 4.9% nationally. Now, that's one of the consequences. The brokerage industry, overall, one of the things we're seeing is obviously competition for the recruitment and retention of agents. And that competition is as fierce as I've seen it in my entire 40 plus years in the industry. It's always been there. It's just that there are so many alternatives for real estate agents and teams today. There are traditional graduated commission plans. There are capped company dollar plans, 100% plans, transaction fee plans. There's EXP, there's United, there's Fathom, there's HomeSmart, there's Realty One Group, there's Coldwell Banker, there's infinite number of options for agents. Now, we know something about the brokerage industry, which is if it were always and only about the commission split or fee program of a brokerage company and an agent, if it were always just about money, well, everybody but the cheapest people would be out of business, of course. It makes rational sense. But that's not the case. And for brokerage companies, it's more, as I talk to owners of brokerage companies, what kind of brokerage do you want? What do you want to stand for? What benefits do you want to offer? What do you personally value? We also say, well, there's room for Walmarts, which is very large, low-cost brokerage companies, and Nordstroms, which are more higher cost to agents, but provide a lot more value. And the key thing to understand about a brokerage company is you can be a Nordstrom's or a Walmart. Just don't try to be both at the same time. That never works. Yeah. And by all means, don't get caught in the middle where you're not really differentiated enough to be able to describe your value to an agent very clearly. And understand that not every agent will think what you're offering is what they're looking for. And lastly, one thing about agents and teams is what they value changes both over time and how their production changes. If they're increasing their production, what you provided initially may not be as valuable. If they are starting to slow down and go the other way, again, what you offer may not have as much value to them. Could be as you're starting out, they need more help, more support, more technology. So those are all things to keep in mind. What I'd like to suggest about the market, I mean, Mark did a great job. That tells us what the market's going to look like for next year. I think agents are now challenged to say, how are you going to develop more inventory? Are you just going to wait for your sphere of influence people to call? Or are you going to be proactive and talk to buyers, to sellers, or pardon me, talk to owners and talk about the implications of a sale and the true pricing in the market and what options, if they were to sell their home, what would they be looking for? And maybe what you have to do is say, once you find that out, is you make sure that when something comes up that fits what they're looking for, that you immediately are in touch to say, we found what you're looking for. Would you now consider selling if we can get that done in a matter of time? There's new tactics that agents are going to have to employ to develop inventory, new clients, and new customers, right? As if it were ever any different. You have to adapt to the changing circumstances. And the last thing I will say I would offer, my God, for the last 25 years, if I hear the word real estate technology one more time, I think I'll shoot myself. Yes, okay, let's put it correctly. You need to have a completely automated platform for identifying customers, reaching them, staying in touch, transacting the business completely online, completely automated. If you're not doing that, you're behind the 8 ball. Consumers expect it now. We just went through a whole time period where people weren't ready for it. But those who survived and prospered this last 6-7 months, they got with that program. They now could do complete online transactions, right? And that could be virtual showings too. I do think once we get by the impact of the pandemic, and we pray that will happen in 2021 for all of us, that people will want to go back to actually looking at the homes they're buying. But you need to be prepared for those who won't. And they will want to look at it online. What we're saying about technology, therefore, is yes, it's a necessary instrument and tool. But every single consumer study we've done for the last 20 years, recent buyers and sellers, and by the way, the good news is the percentage of people using agents has gone steadily up for the last 20 years. Even with all the technology, it's gone up. And by the way, that includes millennials and Gen X who actually use agents at a higher frequency than even boomers, which is kind of interesting. But it's the personal relationship with an agent, and it is the personal service and skill of an agent that they value the most. 2/3 of them still find an agent because they know one or someone they know referred them.
Gotcha.
So yes, Zillow's going to grab a piece and Open Door and the iBuyers and everybody's, but 60 to 70% of all consumers say, I still want to use an agent I know, or that somebody I have a relationship with. And they all report for 20 years that the most important factor in a relationship with an agent is trust. They want to be able to trust their agent. Everyone listening in on this today knows the attributes, the behaviors of people we deal with that help build trust. And you just have to sit and think carefully is, why do I trust my attorney, my accountant, my doctor, my grocer, my liquor store guy, my restaurant people? What is it that they have done to create the fact that we trust them? And then you have to replicate that when you're dealing with buyers and sellers. And one last thing, that goes the same for brokers in their relationship with their agents and teams. We have done numerous studies, exhaustive studies, of why agents choose a brokerage, why they stay with the brokerage. Time and time again, it comes back primary, top of the list. I trust them. I trust them to look out for my interests. I trust them to provide what I need. I trust them to be there when I need them. So for all the technology, it is vitally important that real estate agents, teams, and broker owners understand we are primarily still an industry of relationships. Technology supports our ability to do our business, but that's not going to help you in the end if you're not doing a good job building enduring relationships with your clients and customers. So Kasandra, that's what I wanted to share today.
That's amazing information. I actually have a couple of questions that have come in, and one directed probably to what you were speaking of. Have you seen any trend in the top teams of boutique brokerages, or any brokerage for that matter, creating their own smaller brokerage? Have you seen that happen?
Yes, I mean, obviously, yes, we have seen, and I will say it this way, a small but increased frequency of teams forming their own companies. Mm-hmm. I say small but increasing for this reason. Some on the call may know we rank the top agents and teams in the country. For teams, it's those teams doing 75 transactions or 30 million in volume. Last year, we tracked 7,200 of them. Wow. On our rankings. You know what we notice about most of them? They're still with a named brokerage, not their own. And when I say most, I mean 95% of them are still with a named company or another brokerage company, not their own. So while we do see an increasing frequency, it's still a very small percentage of all the teams out there.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you for that info.
Yep.
And I also want to let everyone know, and thank you again, and let everyone know that's watching that Steve and Real Trends are partnering with the Alliance this upcoming year for a variety of initiatives, along with powering our coming rankings of the LGBT and ally agents and teams. So we want to thank you for that,
Nope.
Steve.
we're honored to be asked to work with you on that.
That's awesome. And again, many, many congratulations for Real Trends merger with Housing Wire. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
A couple of more questions. This next one can be directed to either you, Steve, or Mark, whomever would like to answer. This came in from one of our viewers. Now, with more LGBTQ plus families having children, are you seeing LGBT exodus from the dense cities to the suburbs? We kind of touched on this earlier. Our community usually is attracted to the metro areas, which is historically more expensive. Would either one of you like to answer that or touch on that?
I can talk.
I'll pass Mark because I don't have any actual data on that.
that was going to be my answer. Unfortunately, I don't have any specific data, but I would say it seems those kinds of behaviors around when one has families, regardless of who you are, those are the same. And, you know, why does everyone love the suburbs when they have families? You know, schools, backyards for the dog, all of those kinds of things. And I would argue that those are ubiquitous desires and preferences across the spectrum for everybody.
I would think he's right about that.
Yeah, you concur. And another great question that came in is, it's great to those who are employed now and have the ability to work from home, thus determining where they want to live or relocate. But what about those who cannot? A lot of the population is already marginalized. What do we think the impact on housing and the economy will look like from the massive unemployment rates we're seeing due to COVID? Obviously, career stability is primary to the ability to rent or own. Either one of you like to?
Steve, you take first crack on this one.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this. I don't have any exact data other than what I've read in other people's reports, but we have millions of renters who are facing the end of the moratorium on their rent payments. Mm-hmm. I think I read something in the Wall Street Journal from Moody's Analytics that talked about 7.8 million renters are facing this. It could be a higher number or lower, but it sounded Moody's usually pretty good about stuff. I'm not actually worried about the forbearance mortgage people. Mark addressed that. They probably have equity, and if it doesn't, if they can't get a job back to afford the mortgage payment, to be able to probably exit their home with equity. But I, for the life of me, do not understand what the various federal and state authorities are going to do or thinking about doing at the end of this month when those moratoriums on rent payments end, I think. I also, by the way, that's my first concern. My second concern, and a lot of those people, and I have neighbors and friends, I mean, people right here in my little community who work at these restaurants and dry cleaners, and if they don't get the chance to open up pretty soon, they're gone. And no, they don't have a chance to move somewhere else. I don't know what they're going to do. I also am concerned, because I used to be one, is the millions of landlords who own 1 or 2 or 3 rental units, and it was their retirement income, who haven't had people paying them rent for 6 months. And what happens, for instance, if the moratorium is extended? So I don't know. I'll throw that to Mark. I mean, I don't have any answers, except for I think we've got a huge problem sitting on our doorstep, and I haven't heard what anybody's planning to do about it.
Yeah, Kasandra, you have to promise us that there will be one or at least one more question after this one, because I want to end on a high note, not a low note.
We have a couple more, and I apologize about that. It is an important topic to touch on, but we do have a couple more.
But I'll answer. I got some follow-ups for what Steve said. So, you know, there are 2 unemployment programs that, you know, not the standard unemployment state level, not the standard unemployment program, that those benefits expire on December 26th. Like, oof, wait, happy Boxing Day.
Yeah.
But the scary part is, and that's sort of the gig workers, the self-employed, and extended pandemic insurance programs. That's 14 million people. That's a lot, right? And when you put an M on it, that's a lot. And Steve gets to the point that what this pandemic has really done is highlighted a trend that has been going on in this country for a number of years towards a more income and wealth unequal society. And that was there before, but it's being put into stark contrast now. I think if you've read the newspaper, people talk about K-shaped recoveries. The person asking the question was really making the point, like, if you're on the up part of the K, that's the person who's working from home, still has their job, is in a relatively safe industry given COVID. And the downside of the K, that's all those renters. To Steve's point, that's all those renters in the hospitality and the service sector and all of these industries where it's just there's conceptually there's no such thing as working from home if you're a server. It doesn't exist. And so that's being put into stark contrast. When it comes to us in the real estate market, the unfortunate truth where I started my presentation was the upside of the K is much more likely to be the homeowner. And in fact, part of the inequality issue is related to home ownership. Home ownership is a huge wealth creation engine. If you aren't one, particularly with house prices going the way they are, you don't get to accumulate that wealth. And wealth protects against bad times, right? Everyone talks about, well, worst case scenario, you borrow against your home to actually continue to make your mortgage payments in some case. And then so it's really that K-shaped, income wealth inequality that's being exacerbated now. And Steve, all those small landlords, they're the ones in forbearance because they went and got a regular old loan from Fannie and Freddie, and now they can't make the mortgage payment because they can't get the rent, right?
Yeah, that's a definitely difficult situation.
There was nothing in the background of the country that ever prepared. I started to write a whole column about 3 months ago, and I was worried about this. I said, you know what? I'm kind of fed up. I think the feds need to shut down Apple, Google, Microsoft, shut them down, force all those people out of work, and then we'll get a real sense of so they know what it feels like. I mean, our business, we're a little company, Real Trends. We have 7-8 people. We lost 40% of our revenue this year because they shut all the meetings down. But I think about all the money we would have spent at all those hotels.
Oh, the multiplier effects are huge. Yeah.
And the funniest part is I talked to the heads of big realtor associations, and they have a flood of cash from new members. Oh, and guess what? They didn't have to go to any meetings this year. So their travel budget, which was this huge part of what they spend money on, they didn't spend it. So Mark is exactly right. I hadn't heard the K shape. Actually, I got that picture in my head. I would love to get the attention of certain people in positions of authority in our country to say, this is the issue right here. It's our service and gig workers who are typically renters. You forget I'm going to survive just fine. But what about them? Because if they aren't able to get off the carpet soon, they're going to have a hard time ever getting off the carpet. It's going to be very hard.
That is so true.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, I'm not going to get on that soapbox.
Yeah.
We need some other
high note. We got to get on a high note.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll turn the tables just a bit. Another great question that came in for either one of you or both of you is, with the economy and inventory shortages and other national issues, should agents strive, should agents strive to push prospects towards buying versus renting, or vice versa? Or should we just strive to get as many prospects into living arrangements as the opportunities are available? I assume know the answer to this, but I'd like
Moving to Canada is not an option.
Yeah.
No, buy. Like, I mean, if you can afford to buy a home now. This is unprecedented levels of leverage. You're not going to see rates like 3%, maybe for another year, but they will go away, and it won't happen for another generation or two. So buy the home, start generating the wealth now.
Right. I agree.
And how would you, either one of you or both of you, suggest we do that? We suggest this idea to people who are single and maybe don't have families or not in committed relationships, who tend to rent or live in a condo, townhome, apartment lifestyle. How would you suggest we market that to those folks?
Buy.
Think they need
Buy.
Buy.
Just buy.
It doesn't matter. I mean, if it's a 1-bedroom, 600, 700 square foot place in San Francisco, buy it. Don't rent it. Buy it.
You're going to get the wealth. You're going to get the wealth benefit. In the old days, the adage was you're not supposed to buy if you're not going to hang out in that house for 5 to 7 years, right? That's predicated on like the 6, 7, 8% mortgage rate and the cost of closing and all. No, like now with rates this low and prices going up, expected to keep going, you can have a horizon of 2 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's
because
awesome.
the shortage Mark talked about, there's no solution to this that any of us see in the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
We're still creating 300, 400,000 more households a year than we're building housing.
Yep. Yeah, we're 1.3 million households, barely a million building.
Well, I can
and counting.
And counting. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say San Antonio, where I'm located, is growing rather quickly. We have a lot of space for new construction, so everyone, come on down.
Hey, one thing we haven't talked about is we have a new administration that are going to, from everything they've said and that's been written, they are going to tend to want to liberalize immigration. Now stop and think about that.
More demand.
And the administration also wants to give first-time home buyers $10,000 to $15,000 in cash to go buy something after they forgave their student debt. I mean, this is like we got a big fire burning out here, like the ones we had in Colorado, and now let's just throw some gasoline on it.
Yeah.
Federal housing policy has always been demand side policy, right? And those two things you said, that's all about stimulating demand. That's fine when you have plenty of supply. But when you flip it and you try and push the demand lever as hard as you can against tight supply, all you get is house price appreciation. That's it. That's it. The solution from a policy perspective has to be supply side now. The problem is supply side policy is driven at the local, state, municipal, county level. And now let's have a whole another meeting talking about NIMBYism, YIMBYism, regulation, zoning, and the fact that, Kasandra, you live in San Antonio where there's barely any, which is why there's all the home building there.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. Well, this is very informative and a lot of knowledge for us to take away. And I thank you both so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy day today.
It was a pleasure. Mark, nice to meet you.
Yeah,
you too. Pleasure.
First American and Steve Murray of Real Trends. I thank you so much. To everyone out there watching that isn't a member of the Alliance, I urge you to log on to realestatealliance.org and join our little happy family. Thank you so much, guys. And Ryan, thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful day.
Kasandra, I wanted to thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to keep these two gentlemen in line. I appreciate your efforts. Thank you so much. Steve, good to see you. Mark, good to see you. Take care, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Happy holidays.
Thank you very much.